Welcome back to the Nick Tiffany's movie reviews in the podcast form. Today we are breaking into my top 10 favorite films of the year, starting with this review for The Batman. To know me is to know and understand my love of Batman. There's no greater superhero to me. I have more Batman comics than I have most of anything in any category in my life, more than games or movies or anything like that. I got a great replica cowl this last year for Halloween, based off of Ben Affleck's Batman from Zack Snyder's Justice League. So to say I'm a fan of Batman is a bit of an understatement. So I was exceptionally pleased to discover that Matt Reeves, who was made famous by the Planet of the Apes trilogy he directed recently, when it was decided that he would helm a new Batman film with Robert Pattinson playing Bruce Wayne in Batman. A lot of people had a lot of opinions about Robert Pattinson at first, and this is kind of always the case, I feel like, with Batman especially, but a lot of superheroes, when it comes time to recast or put someone new in the saddle, most people this time around obviously were like, oh, you're going to make the Twilight guy Batman? Edward Cullen is going to be Batman? Come on. To which I would say, if you are a fan of film, in the last, over a decade, Robert Pattinson has just been putting out some phenomenal work, especially in the independent circuit, but he is a fascinating actor. And I think when people finally saw Tenet, Christopher Nolan's Time movie, they got a better idea that, okay, this guy looks pretty dashing in a suit. I could see him playing a Bruce Wayne type. But those who know understand that he is a really incredible actor who's capable of a lot. And then a lot of big news came out because Colin Farrell was going to be playing the Penguin, and he was going to be stuck under a ton of prosthetic. And you had Jeffrey Wright, who was going to be an African-American James Gordon this time around. And, of course, people had to bitch about that online. But, Jeffrey Wright's probably one of the better actors we have working right now. You may know him from Westworld. He was in some of the Daniel Craig James Bond movies as his CIA friend. This is a pretty stellar cast that they assembled for this. You've got Andy Serkis, the master of all things sci-fi and fantasy and anything, who played Gollum. He did the motion capture and voice for Gollum. He did the motion capture and voice for Caesar in those Planet of the Apes films, directed by our director Matt Reeves here. John Turturro, Paul Dano. The cast is stacked. Zoe Kravitz playing Catwoman. The first thing that just solidified this film for me, almost from the get-go, I remember watching it opening night in the theater. Michael Giacchino, who is just one of the best, if not the best working composers out there, just delivers this Batman score that's so dark and so ominous. And the best thing ever is watching all these moments where criminals look into the darkness, scared out of their minds because Batman might be lurking there. So we might have to go the other way. You know what? We dropped something back there. Leave it because it's not worth it. Once his symbol's up in the sky, nowhere is safe. And if you're a criminal, you're always looking over your shoulder. And I think they did such a good job of showing the fear that Batman puts into criminals, just so early on. And the idea that you're always paranoid, there could always be something out there watching you. Batman can't be everywhere, but his goal is to make you think he can. So as a big fan of the comics, this is a Batman story that takes place essentially in year 2 of Bruce's time as Batman. This is less of a film. It kind of goes back and forth. There's a decent amount of time spent with Bruce Wayne. A majority of it is spent as Batman. And I think in a next film, we probably will spend more time with Pattinson outside of the suit. But given that this is year 2, it's present day, 2022. the technology he's got is pretty fascinating, and how he keeps his records of his days, because something that was integral in a lot of the Batman comics was he is a detective. And a lot of people forget that sometimes, but he is the world's greatest detective, and part of that is because he spent so much time journaling every single night. Every time he'd go out on patrol, whether it was thugs he stopped here, or bank robbery here, little connections and interrogations he made, every night he's patrolling, every night he is getting a better idea of the city, understanding how to get around the city, places that he knows are pretty frequented by criminals, things like that. And so this film does a really good job, I think, of showing you, and of course we get a Robert Pattinson narration at the beginning, just about his time in Gotham and everything he's seen, and hoping he's making a difference. Because this film really dives into the political backside of the Wayne family, the big crime bosses is the Falcones, Carmine, played by John Turturro, corruption within politics. It's pretty fascinating because there are a lot of the older Batman stories are pretty heavy on the gangster stuff, on the political drama. I think for a while they kind of got away from that as Batman started fighting more bigger villains, and his stories got more grandiose. You move away from that because he's out in the cosmos helping fight off nether bat people, and there's all sorts of stuff that's happening in comics now. But they had kind of moved away from some of that older style of storytelling, just as far as the political corruption goes in Gotham. So I thought that was a really fascinating angle to take in this film. Much like in The Dark Knight Rises, and the idea that, not everything always happens by the book, and it's hard enough to keep those criminals in jail and make something happen in Gotham. So you certainly see that here. And so you start this story with the Riddler, played pretty fantastically, I'd say, by Paul Dano, who in this film is given far more of a serial killer dynamic. He's honestly terrifying for the first half of the film. There's that sense of, whether he doesn't know how powerful he is, or he just can't control how crazy he gets as he's beating somebody, and you're terrified because it's like, okay, you're like, that's enough, I'm sure he's dead, or like, I'm sure, like, oh God, it's kind of unnerving. And all I'll say for that is that I wish they leaned a little bit more heavily into the serial killer side of the Riddler. As the story progresses, you find perhaps that, maybe he's helping influence some other people around the city. But I much rather, I enjoyed the idea that he is usually his own person. And, he might have some henchmen here and there, but, he is the grand orchestrator of... I'm like, there's a puzzle, there are some mysteries, but most everything is specifically for the Batman, because the Riddler is trying to figure out who this man is, while also using him to help bring about his own form of justice, whether Batman knows that or not. I wish that there was a little bit more of Alfred in this movie as well. This film, I don't think it's in my top 5 of my top 10 list. It is certainly a film I've watched 3 times this year. I love it, and the more I watch it, the greater I appreciate it. It's not without its gripes for an almost 3-hour movie. I think the last portion that it spends, almost after part of where you would assume the film may wrap up, there's a whole third act that jumps out of nowhere at first. And it does lead to some really dramatic and incredible shots in the film. But it felt like it was just a beat too long. Or it felt like, all right, I don't know if that was like the big plan we all thought it was, but you're certainly sticking with it. And it's an ending that certainly gives way to sequels for this film. They've talked about they're doing a Penguin TV series for HBO that'll be starring Colin Farrell again, and kind of discussing the world of the Batman as Penguin sees it, as he's trying to seize some power in the criminal underground. I wish we got a little bit more of Alfred in this film. I think Andy Serkis is a really terrific actor, and so to be seeing him outside of playing a CG character is always great. And this is his version of an Alfred strikes me as one who's a little more stern. I think, we've been used to a jokey Alfred, and there always is time for those jokes. But you got to remember, Alfred was in the British Armed Forces, a special agent. He was everything from a soldier to a medic. And so there's this whole background to Alfred that's pretty fascinating. And, he's kind of a take no shit kind of person, even though he works for Bruce, especially as they grow in their relationship as Batman grows. Alfred's kind of on him, and he kind of has to be, because it's like you have a public image you have to uphold whether you want to or not. You've got to show up for stock meetings. You have to come do these things. And when he's running himself ragged out there, it's like, you need to stop. You need to breathe. You need to rest and get some sleep. To which, of course, Batman will always push back against Alfred, because crime never sleeps. But I enjoyed the dynamic they had, because Andy Serkis still sees this broken child that's in this younger Bruce still. And he's seeing how Bruce is trying to get all this anger out, and seeing how some of it can still hinder him. And I wish we had just a little bit more time with them on that. But I think we do get just a great amount of time spent with Gordon. And I can't stress enough again, I think Jeffrey Wright was fantastic in this movie. He borders this kind of smarmy detective who, he still, like everybody else, has his issues with Batman. Coming and going. Hey, why don't you do this on the police server side for me? Why don't maybe you take the fall for some of this? Even though Jim knows it'll help, because Jim Gordon is a good guy. And Jim Gordon's one of the few good cops there in Gotham. And so watching their relationship bud throughout the film, and watching them get better together, cluing each other in on things and working better, it paves the way for obviously a really, professional relationship, I should say, between them, because, Batman and Gordon never quite, I wouldn't call them friends necessarily. They're about as close a friend as the other has in Gotham when it comes to fighting all this organized crime. But their chemistry was great. I think they're really funny together, actually, in some moments too. And they've got a great scene in particular inside the prison cell where they got to fake like Batman's knocking him out so he can get away, but that they don't give up the fact that Jim knows him and may work with him. And this leads to Batman kind of utilizing, first he's got to get to the top of this building because cops are chasing him. We expect Batman to have this giant cape, and in the Dark Knight, I forget what they use. It's some form of static electricity or something that helped make the cape rigid so he could glide. Year 2 Batman here does not have that. He's got one of those cool wingsuits that those wingsuit flyer squirrel guys do. And you see him like zip his entire suit up for a while, pop these wings out, and he falls off the top of the building before they can grab him. And, for a while he's gliding pretty well, but eventually he crashes. But I don't know. It's cool because, I don't know. In superhero films, either if they fail, it's taken for a laugh nowadays. They're like, oh, look at him slam into the side of the wall. Wasn't that funny, kids? I think here is a really realistic depiction of, all right, number one, this is insane because it probably will work. But number two, I'm also going to hit that ground hard. And, we know what to do for next time. Maybe we need to actually get a rigid cape instead of a squirrel suit. But looking at his suit and the fact that there's so much metal and so much Kevlar and how military-like it is, he's got these boots, which I loved because every step he took out of the darkness, whether you could see him or not, you could hear the little ting, ting. You knew something was out there, but you didn't know where, until he menacingly steps into frame, looking like he's got full-body Kevlar, and this broken gun turned into the bat symbol on his chest. And, anybody who saw the trailer Also saw him beat the crap out of that guy and, tell you, I'm vengeance. That moment happens like right at the beginning of the movie, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's like, okay, cool. We got it out of the way. Everyone knew what to expect. Plays great in the theater. Plays great at home because you're like, geez, man, he's a menace. He could just destroy any of them. But there weren't that many more moments like that throughout the film. And I was kind of hoping there would be, like, if we're sticking with Arkham Asylum Batman, who can take on 10 goons at a time and just kick ass, I was hoping that we'd get a little bit more of that. There's that cool scene in the hallway where they're shooting at him, and, you could just see the bullets deflecting. You could hear him deflecting, and you slowly see him walking in the muzzle flare. But, that's a scene, too, that is weirdly edited because it's this dark music as he's doing this for like 10 seconds, and then they're like, cut to a not random, but different serious scene. It was like, oh, you're just like showing me that to be like fun. You're not going to do more with it. I guess you just had to fit it in somewhere there. So, and that's, towards the end of the film is when all this stuff kind of gets a little more jumbled. And so I wish there was a little more cohesion in the end, but, by far and away, I think this is definitely my favorite superhero movie of 2022, undoubtedly. I think for all its faults, it's still pretty fantastic. It is a detective-first film, which a lot of people I know maybe had an issue with too, because it's Batman, and I'm with you. I'm like, I wanted a little bit more action and fighting, but as a fan of Batman, I really appreciated how true this was to his detective work, to how he profiles Gotham, to how he works with the GCPD. We know we're going to get more. We know there's going to be future films, so I think that it's exciting to think about which villains they could bring in for that, whether it's Poison Ivy, whether it's Mr. Freeze. With Catwoman, I think they were good in the film together. A lot of people made a big deal online about Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz and these photo shoots that they did, and they're like, oh, they're such a sexy couple. Not that they were a couple in real life, but, they're like, the two of them together is objectively an attractive-looking group, an attractive couple. So getting into the movie, it was like, okay, I can see he's kind of the voyeuristic from a distance, certainly not emotionally stable enough to actually have a meaningful relationship with her, and obviously we know that's Batman's cross to bear as well, as he's just always working. There's no time for love. Love only gets in the way, and family is the thing that you have to protect. And so it wasn't something I thought would totally work out like a lot of the newer comics are doing with Batman and Catwoman's relationship. But I don't know, in the film I thought that their chemistry was fine. They have a few really fun moments together, but it was never anything that I was like, oh yeah, these two are gonna end up, or I can see why you're so longing for her love there. But then again, in the long run, most of my gripes are minor, because that messy last act leads us to one of the greatest scenes I've ever seen in a Batman movie. And I'm like really trying hard not to spoil it, because I hope most of you have seen it by now. If you haven't, it's on HBO Max, where all good DC things are. But there is a moment where we don't often see Batman in the light of day, at least in the films either. And he's discussing what he thinks he can be to the people of Gotham, what he wanted to be, but maybe what he really needs to be. And usually people are scared when they look at him. Even if he's helped them out, even if he just kicked the butt of the robber who was just robbing you, you're still scared. You're like, all right, well, thanks, but like, don't hurt me, I guess. And we know that's not Batman, and that comes with the fear he wants to instill, because he needs to be perceived a certain way. But it really is a great moment where this woman is, clinging onto his hand before she's about to get a helicopter evac'd out off a rooftop. Everybody's covered in rubble. Batman, his whole suit's covered in dust. And this woman looks at him, doesn't want to let go of his hand, because he carried her up there. He carried her out of the rubble. We see the side of Batman, who is willing to put himself out there in the front line with these workers. Hey, let me help get all these people out to safety. And this look and exchange that they have as she's being lifted up, and you see Batman watching, making sure she's okay, but understanding the role that he can also play in Gotham. I'm like, whew, I'm getting a little emotional talking about it right now. I'm like, it's powerful stuff. Really, really good stuff. I mean, and again, if you're a fan of Batman, there are more than a few moments in here that highlight the best of what he can be. And for everyone who always rags on him for not having powers, for not having whatever, there's a reason he's the best. There's a reason he can do it all. God, now I just got to go watch this movie again. All right, I'll stop ranting about Batman for now. Eventually, once I get through a lot of these catch-ups, I really do want to get into some longer form discussions, whether it's about the Batman movies, whether it's about comic books, superheroes, all those things. I've got a couple guests who are already going to have to come on when we discuss some of that as well, but that will be coming in the future. Also, don't sleep on the car chase scene in this film. I mean, I'm like, watching that in IMAX was incredible. I feel like it's really hard. This is my last point. The lad just, it just popped in my head. It's really hard these days to make a really good car chase scene. And I say that because I feel like a lot of them have already been done. The further along we get with film and seeing similar stunts and things, it's like, no, I've seen this before. I've seen a car chase. No. Michael Giacchino's score, combined with the kinetic energy of just this weaving traffic, it's raining, you've got all these headlights coming at you. Oh, it is awesome. And Batman's just driving this, it's like a Dodge Charger or something. Clearly that he's souped up with Kevlar, and he's just breaking through barriers, chasing after Penguin. And of course, and then you end up with the upside down shot of him looking out at Batman, menacingly walking with fire in the background. And, it's just such a great shot. There's so many cool moments in this movie. That again, if you're a fan of Batman, it's just like, you couldn't think that they could make him cooler, and they do. So I tip my hat to you, Matt Reeves. Robert Pattinson, I think he did a great job. Naysayers be damned. With all this DC drama going on with James Gunn and Peter Safran's new universe, they've been a little slow on updating us on what's happening with the Penguin TV show and the Batman 2, because there's a new DC slate they're supposed to be releasing sometime in the next few days. I'm not sure if I believe that, but I really hope that this world is kept separate like they've said they're going to, because I think they could make a lot of great content out of what we've already gotten. So if you haven't seen it, watch The Batman on HBO Max. You won't regret it. And we'll see you next time with one of my next top 10 films of 2022. Thanks.